Our guest speaker today is Jeff Marks, General Manager of WDBJ Channel 7 and a former member of our club. And to introduce him is Tom Miller. I'm thinking you guys look alike.
Jeff really needs no introduction, having been a member of this club for a number of years. He is still the current president and general manager of WDBJ-7, our local CBS affiliate, for another short period of time until some events take place that I'm sure he will tell you about. Jeff was a wonderful member of this club. Channel 7 was very supportive of this club through corporate sponsorship and has continued to be very supportive of this club in offering public service announcements for our KPAD event, which is extremely important in making sure people get there. Jeff has a nice resume, but you know what? I'm just going to let Jeff talk to you. Here he is, Jeff Marks.
Thank you, Tom. I'm a little surprised that there was actually anybody to introduce me, because Spangler invited me, and then he had to go out of town. So he called Wilner, and Bart was out of town. And then Ken Briggs was supposed to introduce me, and Ken has the flu. So in the case of everybody else taking it one step backwards, I appreciate Tom doing this. I also appreciate Judy. Judy was one of the first people I met when I came to town, because I wanted to get active in the opera. And so I called the opera office, and Judy answered, and she said, "We're in rehearsal for Hansel and Gretel. Come on over and sit on the rehearsal." I said, "Does the conductor appreciate that?" And she said, "Loves it." And that has created a relationship that Judy and I have had for 8.5 years, and that I have had with the opera for that long, which is, by the way, I'll do $2 of brag bucks on Judy. It is my opportunity to plug the arts. I've been involved with United Way on the human services side, and I cannot tell you the importance of maintaining strong United Way campaigns in this area. If you're not doing it, if you're not involved with United Way, get that way. But also, we need the arts in our schools. Arts are part of a well-rounded education, and most arts organizations in this area provide products of excellence and do it on a shoestring, and that shoestring is getting elongated and attenuated to the point that it's difficult. And so come to the opera, La Traviata, April 8th or 10th, a few tickets available. It's going to be a performance you won't believe, but also support the other arts organizations as well. I did enjoy my time in Kiwanis. I got to lead the sing-along once in a while. I got to flip pancakes, and I see what Kiwanis continues to do with the key clubs and the Virginia Western Group and the Action Club. You are engaged in your community, and that's the kind of thing I would like to talk to you about today. In case you wondered, we at WDBJ-7 are stronger than ever. But not a day goes by when I don't think about Allison and Adam. For those who were not here, Allison and Adam were our journalists who were gunned down while on a story on August 26th of last year. But as an example of what I just said about not a day goes by, yesterday I took part in a meeting to figure out how to address concerns about security at one of our news bureaus. At another meeting, we discussed progress toward the permanent memorial out in front of our building. In another setting, I discussed the attitude and well-being of an employee who was still deeply affected by the shootings. I worked on this talk. And FedEx delivered a box containing a football helmet. It came from Liberty University. The athletic director sent me one of the helmets that was emblazoned with the teal and maroon ribbon that they had worn during one of their football games. 5 things directly related to the killing 6 months ago, and it was not yet 2 o'clock. To say that the team at WDBJ-7 has been through hell the last 6 months would be an understatement. Now, I don't mean to minimize the difficulties the families have gone through, and we have mourned with them and worked with the Wards and the Parkers. We have learned along this way that people recover at different paces and in different ways. I didn't cry much during the whole thing, but Thursday night I was at the basketball game between the VTC medical students and the faculty, and Jill Harrington, this is to raise money for the Morgan Harrington Fund and for scholarships. And Jill Harrington got up and she talked for a moment about their sense of loss. And then she talked about ours and how supportive we had been of them, and yet we were going through all of this ourselves, and tears started running down my cheeks. So I'm just here to tell you that you don't get over this stuff very quickly, and I am so proud of my team for the efforts that they have made. We have addressed security in our building, improved the lighting around the building, put up mirrors at exits and monitors so people before they leave the building can see what all of our security cameras show. And here's the irony. We've never had a serious incident at our building. This killing happened 30 miles away at Smith Mountain Lake, and it exposed that journalists are vulnerable everywhere. Journalism has never been a safe undertaking. Well, maybe safer than police and fire and the soldiers who jump out of airplanes and go to war. But journalists have died alongside those soldiers and are dying at an alarming pace in hotspots around the world. And in a world where it seems that people are getting angrier, reporters can be stalked and can be targets just because of what they report. News presenters have been subject to stalking for years. You don't know the stories about the calls and emails that come in to the folks you see on the air. The owners of WDBJ-7, and we are about to change owners. We have been owned for 46 years by Schurz Communications, a wonderful family-owned company out of South Bend, Indiana. They've decided that this is the time they ought to get out of the TV and radio business because we're in an era of get big or get out. With 6 television stations, it's hard to go up against the networks who are difficult partners now and against the bigger groups of stations that, for example, own the other 3 stations in town in negotiating for programming. So, but they have stood by us. We have brought in trauma experts. In fact, I belong to a group of executives. We meet once a month, university presidents, bank presidents. It's a pretty neat group, and why they let me in, I don't know. But I told my story in October of what we were going through and the counseling and all the things we were providing, and yet it didn't feel like enough. And the folks in the group essentially said to me, Jeff, you're in over your head, get help. And that liberated me to say, I don't have to have all the answers. And Martha Graves is my assistant and has been for nearly 9 years. And I'm so glad she's here today because she's been such an integral part of this and all of our undertakings at WDBJ-7. We were referred to and found a trauma expert named Pat Prince in Los Angeles. And he has come in 3 times to sit with our people, to tell them what they're feeling is okay, to give them tools for recovery, and to give us in the management team the proper tools and knowledge to be able to help our employees through these periods, through this period. It's been effective. But just yesterday, one of our employees got a 3-page handwritten letter from Mrs. Ward, Adam's mother. And this employee was very close to Adam, and he was in tears, and so was his manager. And that's how close to the surface it continues to be. But when we dedicated our studio, and if you watch TV, and God, I hope you do, somebody this morning or yesterday said, so this morning I was at an early meeting, said, I don't watch TV. There's nothing, comedies aren't funny, da, da, da. And I looked and said, well, thank goodness he's out of the key demographic of 25 to 54. I long ago left that demographic. Out of the tears comes a desire to improve. I've said to the team when we dedicated the studio and called it Studio A, I said, this is not a time to talk about moving on. This is a time to talk about moving up, which is what Adam and Allison were trying to do with their careers. And what we all aspire to is doing more and better. And I see it in the work of many of the people at our company, that they want to honor Allison and Adam by doing more and better for the community. In the Communications Act of 1934, it says that if we're going to have the privilege of using the public airwaves, then we ought to operate in the public interest, convenience, and necessity. And I have dedicated my career to that. I believe you do well by doing good. That's why WDBJ-7 has been involved in so many community things. It comes back to you in good feelings, in a sense of unity, and we build the community, and maybe people watch us as well. I want to talk to you about something else. It's on this page. As much as most broadcasters believe in operating in the public interest, convenience, and necessity, it is the way to be successful. The economic model, though, for broadcasting television, while still strong, is being threatened. I love cable and satellite. They don't do the news, and they don't do the weather, right? And so the current attitude in Washington is, in the regulatory end of the business, is the marginalization of local broadcast television, is letting channels disappear, cutting back the bandwidth, and giving more power to cable and satellite companies to bring in other stations from other markets to compete with us, which undermines the exclusive nature of our contract with CBS and other programming, and that will undermine the economic model. We were socked, and this Federal Communications Commission is extraordinarily punitive. We were socked with a fine for $325,000 for something that appeared in the corner of the screen. It was an obscene image, and it never should have been there, but it was in the corner of the screen, about less than 2% of the screen for about 2 seconds. The largest fine ever issued by the Federal Communications Commission in something like this, negating, at least in the minds of the Commission, 60 years of community service that we have provided. It was a bitter pill to swallow, and as Steve knows, I'm a Democrat. It just about turned me into a Republican. I got to tell you. Or as I say to Martha, I'm a Republican from 9 to 5. Night I can be a Democrat. The First Amendment means that if you have a printing press, you can say whatever you want, unless it's libelous. But you can go ahead and say it. You just might get sued. So why doesn't that apply to television? The idea that there should be heavy regulation of television came about because 75 years ago, there were only a few television stations and there were lots of newspapers. Now there are more television stations in most cities than there are daily newspapers, and plenty of diversity in television and radio, and little in newspapers. Odd then that the heavy burden of regulation is on what we present and how we do business, not on the print media. Don't get me wrong, I do not advocate any government regulation of newspapers. By the same token, I can't see the justification for requiring all television stations, every television station, cable and broadcast, to carry 3 hours of educational programming for children, but yet we're required to do it and make no money in that period. So what child is watching 50 television stations doing children's programming all at the same time on Saturday morning, which is where we all tend to do it? I'm not against kids programming, just ridiculous mandates like this when you cannot place any mandate like on newspapers or on magazines, except postal rules, okay? Think of it. These days, very few radio stations provide news coverage. A couple of good exceptions, WFIR and public radio in this area. The Roanoke Times continues to outperform most newspapers in this size market in terms of circulation. But everybody knows that newspapers' margins have shrunk, and so has the size of their pages. People complain about the Roanoke Times. And let me tell you, in every town I know, the most popular sport is complaining about the local newspaper. But a daily newspaper that shares the watchdog role with us in television is an essential part of a free society. So please watch us and read the newspaper. If you didn't hear me, I said read the newspaper, but also watch us. We old-timers often quote the patron saint of broadcast journalism, a fellow named Ed Murrow, who worked for CBS News 55, 60 years ago. In a speech in Chicago in 1958, he said of television, "This instrument can teach, it can illuminate, yes, and even inspire. But it can do so only to the extent that humans are determined to use it to those ends. Otherwise, it's nothing but wires and lights in a box. There is a great and perhaps decisive battle to be fought against ignorance, intolerance, and indifference. The weapon of television could be useful." But Murrow also warned that it's probably not the government's role. In my view, he was right, but it is the electorate, the community, the audience that must insist on aggressive journalism and community service. And when you go to the television station and say, "Hey, how come my business wasn't featured in that story, or could you cover my grand opening?" You got to understand that that's not the business of the news side of our television station, any more than Scott Pelley should do more positive attention to Ford because they advertise on the CBS Evening News and Chevrolet doesn't. It's just not the way it works, and I hope you won't expect it to be. A young fellow started with WDBJ7 a few weeks ago as a reporter, and I sit down with all new employees, and when I had the chance to chat with him about our company and his goals, I asked him, "What is the role of a journalist?" I ask a lot of young people that, and I get things like, these are applicants, not people we hire. "I really like to talk to people. And I want to be an anchor." That's, by the way, if you have a kid who wants to go into business, that's the death knell. Never walk into a television station to a hiring person and say, "I want to be a news anchor." Say, "I want to be a journalist." And maybe eventually do the boring work of anchoring. And by the way, it is boring. So what did this fella say when I said, "What's the job of a journalist?" He said, "It's to find stuff out and hold people accountable." That made my day, probably my week. He has learned that journalism is a calling. Allison and Adam were in that calling. He also realizes that free over-the-air broadcasting is the way to reach most people. Which brings me back to what fills my days. Well, soon I'm going to move on because I had told the previous owners that I was going to retire early this year, and I told the new owners, although they asked me to stay, that I'd prefer to retire, and they said, "Please stay with our company, and we have a job for you." And that job is in terms of talent development for all their 50 stations. So I will be around, not permanently. I'm going to be at my homes I like to say, I keep a house and a wife in Florida in the winter and a house and a wife in Maine in the summer, and we're very lucky, but she would like me to spend more time with her. So I'll be able to do this job out of my home and occasionally out of Bart Wilner's guest room. And I do plan to be back frequently. Well, even on days when everything seems to harken back to August 26th like yesterday, my job the last 9 years has been to do everything I can to create an atmosphere in which my team members can succeed. I would trade the last 6 months for anything, but I would not trade for anything the chance to have worked for the leading team in this area, trying day in and day out to serve our hundreds of hometowns in the 26 counties of mid-southwest Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, for being with us today and for the inspiring talk you gave to us. As part of our customary part of Kiwanis, as you well know, we have fabulous parting gifts for all of our presenters. We're not going to let you off any easier than we do the chief of police or next week's fellow. First of all, we've got this imitation slab of marble with a Kiwanis emblem on it to thank you for appearing with us, and also this high-quality writing instrument with the Kiwanis logo on it.
I will treasure it.
We get this from Swifty LaRue, who operates out of the back of his 93 Mercury Monarch, and he tells us that this pen is scientifically designed so that when you grip it, either left hand or right hand, a fine mist of super glue comes out of the barrel so that it won't slip out of your hand.
Which at this age.
Absolutely right.
Thank you.
Next week, our program is going to be presented by Mr. Charles Price, who is president of the Harrison Museum of African American Culture, and he's going to be introduced by President-elect Andy Stone. So be sure and show up next week, Andy. If everyone will please rise for the benediction. This is something new. Having passed through our regular order of business, we are now prepared to leave this time of friendship and fellowship to re-enter our everyday world. Before we depart, let's try and remember three things. First, to extend to every person we encounter the same kindness that we as Kiwanians share with each other. Second, let's be ever vigilant for ways to better serve the elderly, the downtrodden, and the youth of our community. And finally, let's take every opportunity to share the hand with those with whom we sympathize and deem worthy of our regard. If we can turn these ideals into actions, we will truly begin building a better tomorrow. Live life, laugh loudly, recruit new members, please, and don't forget, KPAD is almost upon us. This meeting of the Kiwanis Club of Roanoke is now adjourned for the next 167 hours, and will reconvene next Wednesday.